Morning, everybody, and thank you for coming out for International Human Rights Day in Pittsburgh. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to be together and to represent our city's efforts on behalf of human rights in our community. My name is Jackie Smith. I teach sociology at the University of Pittsburgh, but I'm also an organizer with the Human Rights City Alliance in Pittsburgh, where we're working to build a human rights city. And thankfully, we have a lot of great support in our city and in our community, and we'll be featuring that at our press conference today. As a teacher, I like to make 3 points every year on International Human Rights Day. And one is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is about universal rights. Rights don't end at the border. They apply to everybody who is human. These rights are not only universal, but they're indivisible. Economic rights need to go together with civil and political rights. We need to eat as well as vote. The third is that if we don't defend these rights and maintain vigilance, we're going to lose them. And I think we're seeing some of that at work today, and that's one reason it's really important today that we stand up and celebrate international human rights and recognize the 70th anniversary of this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And a fourth point to recall on International Human Rights Day is that as we stand up to defend our rights, we're joined by people around the country and around the world, because this is an international day of action for human rights, and people around the world are doing just what we're doing and recalling the history of struggles that brought us this great document, and to remind ourselves that we all have to be involved in this fight. This year in Pittsburgh, we chose to lift up the theme of displacement as we think about human rights and what's important to us to focus on today. And we're realizing that economic forces, including low wages and unaffordable housing, are displacing people in our communities every day. In addition, climate change is creating even more difficulties for people trying to stay where their homes are. And when people are displaced, their communities are disrupted, and this disruption can lead to backlash that results in discrimination and violence. And if we want solid and resilient communities, we have to build a human rights culture, and that takes working together. So I'm really, really pleased today that we have some great leaders in this human rights struggle here, and we're going to feature first speakers who represent our leadership in the city. We'll have commissioners from the Commission on Human Relations and from the Gender Equity Commission. Both commissions are staffed by volunteers, people like you and me around the community who step up to devote their time and energy to defend our rights and to figure out ways that our city can work better to promote human rights in our city. And followed by folks from the city, we'll see some leaders, human rights defenders in our community working with various constituencies to defend and protect human rights. And I'll introduce them in turn, but we'll start with Mariana Padillas, who's the chair of the City of Pittsburgh's Commission on Human Relations.
Good morning. My name is Mariana Padillas, and I'm the chair of the Commission on Human Relations. First, I'd like to thank our partners in this commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the signing of the Universal Declaration of Rights, the Gender Equity Commission, and the Pittsburgh Human Rights City Alliance, as well as the other speakers present, and of the City Council and the Mayor's Office for the proclamation and recognition of the importance of this day. The preamble of the Declaration recognizes the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all people that are the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, and that the disregard and contempt for human rights can result in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind. The Declaration is written as a universal document, so it's equally applicable around the world, but I think it's at the local level that we can see the importance of the rights it protects. Today, in keeping with our theme of displacement, I want to talk about housing rights. With displacement, we can think about refugees displaced by war, asylum seekers displaced by violence or dangerous conditions, economic migrants who can't find a way to make a living without moving. And here in Pittsburgh, displacement is becoming more of a problem because of increases in the lack of affordable housing. And to be clear, it's not a lack of housing. There's plenty of apartment buildings and condos going up. It's a lack of affordable housing. People are being priced out of neighborhoods where they grew up and are being pushed outside of the city. And buildings with affordable units are being raised and rebuilt, and those units are not being replaced. The question for us is, how are we going to uphold this right to housing in our own city? And maybe this is one of the most important questions facing Pittsburgh in the coming years. The Commission on Human Relations initiated the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Task Force and is working with community organizations and other stakeholders to try and figure out just how we're going to answer that question. Task Force members have met with the Housing Authority to increase the value of its vouchers in certain zip codes and neighborhoods so that voucher holders have more local housing choices. And a program will be launched through the Housing Alliance and Allegheny County Department of Human Services to encourage private landlords to list their properties with the DHS, as well as working with agencies that are seeking to reduce homelessness. The task force also has preliminary recommendations that include adopting an inclusionary zoning ordinance that would require new developments to set aside a certain number of units that would be affordable for low-income residents, providing and incentivizing investment in predominantly African-American neighborhoods, and using non-discriminatory tenant screening criteria for those with criminal records and eviction histories. There's also a preliminary recommendation to maximize the use of the Section 8 home ownership program. Everyone is encouraged to provide feedback on these suggested recommendations and can do so either through the Commission's website or by attending a meeting this Saturday starting at noon at the Sheridan Healthy Active Living Center at 720 Sherwood Avenue. Once again, I want to thank City Council and the Mayor's Office for their formal proclamation of International Human Rights Day in Pittsburgh. Upholding these rights is something we all have to work together on so that Pittsburgh can continue to be one of the most livable cities. And the Commission on Human Relations looks forward to that work and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jessie Ramey, who's the chair of the Gender Equity Commission.
Good morning. I'm Jessie Ramey, and I direct the Women's Institute at Chatham University, and I'm also the chair of the Gender Equity Commission. We're actually the city's newest commission, and our mission is to achieve equity for women and girls in the city of Pittsburgh. Our vision is really a future in which everyone in the city of Pittsburgh, regardless of gender identity or gender expression, is safe in all spaces. And we want to empower everyone to achieve their full potential. We want to make sure that Pittsburghers no longer face the structural and institutional barriers to economic equality, social equality, and political equality. So the Gender Equity Commission is currently analyzing all city functions to identify and eliminate discrimination. We will be making recommendations that will ensure equitable access, resources, and opportunities for everyone. And we are also going to work to promote the cultural shift in the city of Pittsburgh that we know we need in order to make these changes happen. Inequality almost always disproportionately impacts women and girls, especially women of color, women living in poverty, and trans women. So we have to bring the most marginalized people into the center of every conversation about human rights. If we're talking about economic disparities, we have to talk about the fact that the wage gap is stunningly large for Hispanic women. We have to talk about that 68% of Black girls under the age of 5 in the city of Pittsburgh live in poverty. 68%. If we're talking about affordable housing or gentrification, we have to talk about the impact on women, especially women of color, women-headed households, people with disabilities, and our senior women. We've had real displacement of families here in Pittsburgh, and it's had dire gendered impacts. If we're talking about violence, we need to consider that trans women, and especially trans women of color, are some of the most vulnerable members of our community. And Allegheny counties have the highest number of intimate partner homicides of any county in the entire state for several years running. We know that in any area of human rights, if we lift up women and girls, we see real change for families, for children, and for entire communities. As we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I am excited that the City of Pittsburgh is recommitting itself to these internationally recognized principles, and we've got a lot of work to do, and the Gender Equity Commission is thrilled to be a part of making Pittsburgh great for everyone, because when women and girls do better, we all do better, and our communities thrive.
Thank you. As Jesse mentioned, one thing we're celebrating today is the passage of a proclamation by the City Council that rededicates our city's leaders to human rights principles. And we're really, really pleased that all of our commission members co-signed or co-sponsored this proclamation. And one of our co-sponsors who's here today is Member of Council Erica Strasburger, and we are really grateful that you could be here to celebrate with us today and for your leadership with this proclamation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I am honored to be here today to mark the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the International Declaration of Human Rights and International Human Rights Day. And I am proud of the work that's being done across the city and throughout government here and beyond to ensure that Pittsburgh is more welcoming and more inclusive. And we still have a lot of work to do, but we want to make sure we're headed in that direction. And I know that the members of the Gender Equity Commission and Commission on Human Relations understand that. There's a lot that the city has done, and I'll go through some of the accomplishments, but we have now a language access plan to translate critical documents in the most commonly spoken languages. We have a multicultural liaison unit in the Department of Public Safety. We have a ban on the psychologically and physically harmful conversion therapy for LGBTQIA+ minors. We recently earned a perfect 100% score on the Human Rights Campaign, from the Human Rights Campaign for being a welcoming city. We adopted the provisions of CEDAW thanks to the leadership of former Councilwoman Natalia Rudiak, which then formed our Gender Equity Commission to do all the work that you just heard about. We have encouraged employers to help narrow the pay gap for women, as we are doing in the city already. We're encouraging employers outside of the city, government, but within the city of Pittsburgh to do the same. And I was heartened recently as I was hosting a tour of City Hall for immigrant families and refugee families, some of them served by the Latino Community Center. Participants were incredibly thankful to hear from department directors about the services that are offered throughout the city-county building, that they can feel welcome here, that they can access various departments from PLI to 311 to City Council and our police, particularly our Zone 6 police who were there and spoke and reaffirmed that despite hateful rhetoric that they might hear at other levels of government, the city of Pittsburgh values them and values their diversity and the inclusion. That inclusion of them is a hallmark of what we're all about in the city of Pittsburgh. It's also important not to overlook the economic benefits. We need people to move here. We need workers to move here in the city of Pittsburgh and throughout the region if we're going to succeed and not become what we were 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago and lose population. And to do that, we need to welcome our workers from not just within the United States, but from outside of the United States with open arms if we're going to succeed economically. I think another important thing that we've heard today from a lot of our speakers is that it's incredibly important that all of our efforts, all of our fights are intersectional, that it's regardless of whether you care most about gender equity or LGBTQIA rights or the rights of the working poor or the rights of immigrants and refugees, that all of our destinies are linked, and unless we all succeed, none of us will succeed. And so I know that the people representing both of the commissions here today understand that, know that there are members of city government who understand that, and and will continue to fight and bring us all together so we can work collectively to raise us all up and to ensure that as we move forward, the region and the city isn't just a most livable city in name, but truly is the most livable city for every single resident, every single member. So I'm honored again to speak here today. Thank you to both commissions members for the work that you do, and to members of city government who work day in and day out on these issues. And with that, I'll close and let others speak, but I'm honored to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll turn our attention to some of the human rights defenders in our community. And although Pittsburgh is a welcoming city, we're in an environment that's increasingly hostile to people from outside the United States. And here with us, working on the front lines, defending the human rights of residents who are here in Pittsburgh, with one of the kind of fiercest defenders of human rights in our city, Casa San Jose. Cristina Castillo will speak from the perspective of work with immigrant communities.
Hi everyone, my name is Cristina Cuna Castillo, when I think about human rights, I mostly think about immigrants, and I think about their humanity, and I think about how their humanity is not a right for them, at least not yet. And I think about how migration for me means movement, and movement for me also means to be human. And I think about how the movement of migration is criminalized on a daily basis. And yeah, today I'm mostly here to express what Casa San Jose has been working on, especially with a lot of thoughts going around about Border Patrol and how Border Patrol works to push migrants out into the deadliest parts of the land, hoping that they will not come or that they will die in the desert. And there are people who fund this work. There are people who fund this violence and hunting of migrants. And I think that sometimes the distance from Pittsburgh to the borderlands sort of allows for an emotional disconnection and to feel emotionally distant to these issues. But I want to talk about the Colcom Foundation today. And the Colcom Foundation is a foundation that invests tens of millions of dollars into anti-immigrant work that aims to detain, hunt, murder, and exploit immigrants. And in a PR effort, the Colcom Foundation has also gave tens of millions of dollars to organizations in Pittsburgh. And they are community spaces, they are public spaces, public events, where the Colcom Foundation's name and logo is very prominent in these events, especially the downtown holiday market. And recently, after a week of hundreds of people reaching out to the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership, it was nearly 1,000 people in 1 week who reached out to the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership demanding that they remove the sign, that they divest, and that they issue a public apology. And after much community effort, the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership actually removed the signs. They removed the signs from the center stage, which was the biggest sign that they had in the holiday market. It said, Colcom Foundation sponsors this. They removed the Colcom sign from Santa's house, so children will not be posing with Colcom Foundation in these pictures. And while Casa sees that as a very important win that we need to honor and acknowledge, we also want to acknowledge the work that we as a city have to do afterwards, because it's not over yet. There are groups around town who are still receiving money from the Colcom Foundation, and these groups are groups who do good work. They do good work for our communities and for our city, but to receive money from an anti-immigrant and white supremacist foundation is to also be complicit in the violence that undocumented and migrants face on a daily basis. These organizations have an extremely dangerous relationship with Colcom, and we are here today to demand that ends. And so we also want to invite everyone to join us. Our coalition will be having a press conference this Thursday at noon in front of the Holiday Market where the sign used to be, to sort of celebrate and honor the point of our win. But we also want to announce our next steps in getting progressive or publicly accountable organizations to divest from the Colcom Foundation. Because Pittsburgh does not need Colcom money. Pittsburgh does not need millions of dollars from an organization that devalues and dehumanizes migrants in the borderlands. And I appreciate being here with everyone else. It's an honor for the immigrant community to at least the efforts of the community to be here and present. So yeah, that's all I have. And happy Human Rights Day.
So probably one of the most important issues in Pittsburgh regarding human rights and displacement is the issue of affordable housing. We had hoped to hear from Ms. Jayla Rucker, who's with the Northside Coalition for Fair Housing, one of the frontline groups really working hard to help keep people in the city and to make sure that people have safe and affordable housing that's secure. Jayla has been called out to some emergency, which is a daily routine in the life of a housing justice worker. But we're fortunate here to have Helen Gerhardt, who serves many duties. One is she's currently serving on the Human Relations Commission, but she's also on the Affirmatively Forwarding Fair Housing Task Force. And so she'll say a few words about the housing issue in Pittsburgh.
So, when I joined the commission, I really did not know the history of fair housing at all. And this position I had been working out in the community with all kinds of groups on all kinds of issues, public transit and civil rights, and working with the Muslim members of our community, with the Council on American Islamic Relations. As I grew into this job, I learned about the role that government had played in imposing segregation. Too many of us think that it's just part of our racist heritage that just naturally grew. No, through zoning law, through financing, through the planning of highways, government actively separated communities that had been integrated, communities that had lived together, like on the Hill, which is one of the most diverse neighborhoods this city has ever seen. So entire communities were destroyed by that history of action, of knowledgeable action on the part of government. So that means that we in government at all levels, this segregation happened, it was imposed at the local, the state, and the national level. So at all levels, we have a responsibility to repair the harm. There are so many groups of people that have suffered disproportionately. Probably first and foremost in this city are Black Pittsburghers who have been displaced in ways that wreck their lives, that keep them from accessing public transit, which gets them to jobs, which gets them to food, which gets them to all healthcare, the basic needs of life. We also see that we have lots of work to do in assuring the rights of people with disabilities. Again and again, laws are passed to try to repair the harm of the past neglect or active harm, and we still in the city have a long way to go to make sure that we actually follow the disability code. So on the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Task Force, there are over 40 organizations at this point that come from tenant organizers. Jayla Rucker is one of those members out there fighting in her own community on the north side for fair and affordable housing. We have people who represent those who find it very difficult to find a place within the city where they can live. There are immigrants and refugees that don't have the option of coming and living within our city because they cannot afford the cost of housing. So there are old patterns that we together must fight to address. I encourage all citizens, hold us accountable in government. Stand up and demand that we do the right thing. There are many of us that will work together with you to make sure that this human rights city actually lives up to its name. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Laura Weens with Pittsburghers for Public Transit, helping to connect us as people are being displaced and moved around the city.
Hey there, I'm Laura Weens. I'm the director of Pittsburghers for Public Transit. We are a community grassroots organization, an alliance of bus riders and bus drivers that are fighting and mobilizing for equitable, affordable, and sustainable public transit. And when we talk about the right to transit, we talk about the right to move about the city, the right to access all your basic needs, just like Helen pointed out, jobs, healthcare, food, education, social needs. And the fight for transit justice is amazing because it's also beyond being the right to mobility and access. It supports good union jobs. It's the right to environmental resiliency, right? And in this time of great change, climate change, we desperately need solutions, and solutions like public transit to invest in. We're making some progress. When we were here last year, we were fighting proposed cuts to bus service along the Mon Valley, right, where communities, many of them low-income communities, predominantly African-American communities, that were going to see 50% cuts to their Lifeline 61 bus service. We were also fighting the impacts of a proposed policy for armed police to check fares on our transit, along with Casa San Jose and the Alliance for Police Accountability and Thomas Merton Center. And this policy would have posed a grave threat to Black and brown communities throughout our region, through police brutality, the possibility of detainment and deportation, and the criminalization of the poor, which we've seen in many other cities. And we've since won these campaigns over the last year in reversal of these policy proposals. But these are all just pieces of a larger whole, and it's not simply about access to frequent, reliable service going where you need to go, and it's not just about being safe on transit to get to where you need to go. We're now fighting for affordable fares. We have an issue in this county where low-income riders are actually paying more for transit than everybody else, right? Because we have a transit fare policy that insists that if you can't access a Connect card vendor, you have to pay a premium with cash. And if you don't have a direct line that gets you to where you need to go, you have to pay to transfer every single time you transfer, and that's not right. And on the theme of displacement, we're also fighting. We are also insisting that we have policies across agencies that link transit policy to housing policy, because we have an issue where riders across the city are being forced into the county and displaced into transit deserts and then not able to access any of their basic needs. Civil rights movement made bus access a critical fulcrum of their work, and these issues are all connected. Without one, we really cannot have the others. Bus lines are lifelines. Transit justice is housing justice, is immigration justice, is criminal justice. And we are proud to be standing alongside all these other organizations, civic leaders, to insist that we get the full complement of the rights that are entitled to all of us. Thank you.